Hey, welcome to the Summit Host Hangout podcast where you'll learn how to plan, strategize, and launch your profitable online summit. No influencer status necessary. I'm your host, Krista from Summit in a Box, and we are starting a 2-episode series related to using your summit in your funnel. Today, in episode 131, we're starting things off by covering 3 mistakes to avoid when launching your course with a virtual summit. Now, this is a strategy I've become really passionate about after seeing for myself how powerful a summit can be as the lead generator and launch method for an online course. And the very first time I did this, it led me to a $63,000 course launch, which was my biggest launch ever at the time. And that was coming from a small summit with only 1,500 people attended. Imagine what we could do with bigger summits, bigger numbers. Like, we can dream big with this. The possibilities are just endless. However, there are all kinds of places I've noticed hosts going wrong with launching their courses through a summit since I've been paying more attention to it. So I wanted to break those things down in this episode. I also want to point out for any Summit in a Box students, we have a full course that breaks down my exact strategy of launching a course through a summit with templates, all the stuff you would expect from being in Summit in a Box, we have it inside. It's called the Summit to Course Launch Lab, and it covers how to balance a summit and course launch, both for you and your attendees, how to build up to your course launch through the summit, and my exact launch strategy. This course is only available to Summit in a Box students since it builds on the strong summits you learn about in the main course. So if you're a student and you're interested, head to your after section in your course library in the post-summit profits category to learn more about it. But for now, let's dive into these 3 mistakes. And to give you a little preview, they include getting the positioning between your summit and course launch wrong, being gross about it, and assuming you need a paid summit for it to work. So let's start with the positioning. This is one of the biggest issues I see with summits that don't lead to successful course launches. If your summit and your course launch don't fit together naturally, it's not going to work. The transformation your summit promises needs to line up with the transformation from your course. To put it in other terms, the reason attendees would sign up for your summit needs to line up with the reason they would then buy your course. So how in the world do we do this? How do we position a summit to line up with the course? There are 3 ways I have seen this work well. This is not to say these are the only 3 options, but these are 3 things that I know work pretty darn well. So the first thing is that your summit and course have the same transformation, but the course gives it on a larger, deeper scale. So if you have an in-depth course about Instagram marketing, you could host a summit about Instagram marketing. It's okay for those things to be the same. It's going to be the same overall transition that you're promising, but your course goes into way more depth and helps with more implementation and has more resources and all of that stuff. Just note here that this is not going to work for a 101 level course, since the summit would give away too much. It needs to be an in-depth course that dives deeper into strategy, or maybe includes templates, extra support, a reason that people would then need more than just the summit to put it into action. The second way you can position things to make your summit and course line up well is that your summit can be step 1 and your course transformation can then be step 2. So to give you a really bad example, you could have your summit about starting a blog. So starting the blog is step 1. And then that could lead to a course about starting an email list to grow that blog. So step 1 is to start the blog. Step 2 is the email list. But they need the blog before they start the email list. And once they have the blog, they want the email list. So they fit together well. That's what the step 1 and step 2 version of this looks like. Just note that a summit like this would be way too general, would not work well. But that was the easiest example I could think of that would really make it easy to understand. Then the third way you can position things well is that your summit will make them realize they need help with the transformation your course provides, or that they want help removing the barriers that your course removes. So your summit either introduces a desire or a pain point that makes them want your course. So an example of this is a summit I ran with Jen Zeller's Sell with a Summit Course Creator Edition, and we used that summit to sell my program Summit in a Box. So the summit promise was to reach your biggest course launch yet with a virtual summit. So course creators came in and learned about how powerful a summit could be for launching their course. Then my course promise is host a profitable virtual summit without wondering where to start, what to do next. Here are hundreds and hundreds of resources to make it easy. So that positioning worked because the summit made them want to launch their course through a summit, and the course just removed all kinds of barriers and made it really easy for them to do that. So it was a natural transition between those two things. So you'll likely find that one of these options sparks an idea that feels just kind of more right than the other ones. But regardless, the transformation your summit promises needs to naturally lead into your course for any of these strategies to work well. So let's move on to the second mistake I see, which is being gross when it comes to using your summit to launch a course. And I couldn't think of a more graceful way to say it. I tried. But a lot of times it just feels downright slimy when people do this. So what does this look like? I'll give a couple examples of things that always stand out to me. First is just making hard pitches constantly throughout the summit. So if you're advertising a free summit to deliver a transformation, it's not cool to just constantly be pitching something paid all throughout. It doesn't feel good. It's gross. It's slimy. It's going to feel that way to your attendees. Not to mention your speakers who expected to be featured throughout the event, now who are being overshadowed by you just talking about your program constantly. There is a right way to talk about your course throughout the summit, which I go into in depth in the Summit to Course Launch Lab, but hard pitches during the summit are not involved with that strategy. The second way to make it really gross is doing the opposite and making the launch a surprise. So while you don't want to be bombarding attendees with pitches throughout your summit, you also don't want to do kind of a bait and switch where you're like, hey, this is free, this is so fun. And then at the end, boom, just start hitting them with a pitch that they did not expect at all. Does not feel good. So let your attendees know from the very beginning that there will be an offer at the end of the summit. One more way that hosts can be gross about this is not being upfront with their speakers. So if a speaker has no idea you were using the summit to lead into a course launch, it's not going to feel good to them when they figure out what's going on. They're going to feel like they were used, that you just wanted them and their promotion and their presentation to benefit yourself, and that they were just kind of tricked into helping you with that. So make it clear from the very beginning. The way I like to do this is by including affiliate commissions from the course launch as a speaker benefit. So then that's a really easy way in the pitch email, speaker information page, speaker agreement, to talk about those commissions. And that's how they learn, oh, okay, course launch is coming, but I get commissions, so that's cool. You're positioning it as a benefit while also letting them know that it's happening. And then the last way I want to talk about that I see hosts being gross about launching their course through a summit is sending a massive pitch sequence to the entire list of attendees once the summit is over. It is never going to feel good for someone to find you through a summit, have a couple days to get to know you, and then be thrown into a week-long sales sequence. So segment your audience and only send launch information to attendees who are ready for it. And yes, I did this with my tiny summit of 1,500 attendees and still had a $63,000 course launch. I was not pitching to all 1,500 of those people, just the ones who were ready for it. It still works. So those are some of the biggest ways I see hosts being gross when they kind of work those course launches into a summit. Be sure you avoid those things. The third mistake I want to talk about when you want to launch a course with the virtual summit is assuming that if you want to launch a course that you need to host a paid summit. And a lot of people think that if they want people to convert to students, that the summit needs to be paid. People keep getting it in their head that having even a $20 paid ticket gives more qualified leads that are so much more likely to buy that it outweighs the lower attendee numbers that are seen as a result. In almost every case I've ever seen, this isn't actually what happens. Instead, your registrations are so much lower that nothing about the summit works. Not to mention that if you're hosting a paid event, you're going to need to be paying your speakers too. So that kind of cuts in to any money you're going to be making. So unless you have a large existing audience and an established business with a super niche topic, a paid event probably is not going to work, which you can hear even more about in episode 109 with Jordan Gill, who hosts an incredible paid event. But she agrees with me here too that they're not for everybody. So the summit I keep referencing for myself, where we made $63,000 with a tiny, still relatively small attendee count, it was a free summit, very successfully launched a $2,000 course through that free summit. And it's continued to lead to ongoing conversions as people who weren't ready to buy at the time have responded and bought in launches I've done since then. So just because someone doesn't buy right away doesn't mean they're not going to be, nurtured by you and ready down the road. episode. So for most of you, I very highly encourage that you stick with the freemium summit strategy that we talk about in this podcast. That's the only one you're going to hear me talk about. So to recap, overall, I'm very convinced that a virtual summit is the best way to launch a course if you do it the right way, but I will admit that I'm also biased. But be careful to make sure you position your summit the right way to lead to your course, that you use feel-good strategies, and that you really consider sticking with a free summit. So your action step for this episode is to go ahead and figure out your best summit positioning. Listen back through, brainstorm through those 3 different kind of positioning strategies I talked about, and figure out what's going to work best with the type of course you offer. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. For show notes and resources mentioned, head to summithosthangout.com/131. In the next episode, we'll be chatting with a special guest about how a virtual summit is actually a full funnel all in one, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Summit in a Box students, be sure to head to the After section inside of your course and click to the Post-Summit Profits category to learn more about joining the Summit to Course Launch Lab. In the lab, I break down my entire strategy for launching a course through your summit. Everything from making sure it all balances out, building awareness around your course without being gross, and the exact launch strategy I recommend using with resources and templates to make it all easy. Now go out and take action to plan, strategize, and launch your profitable online summit.